From the time of our arrival in Aotearoa, Māori have created a unique architectural history. Our structures not only house people, but also our dreams, our fundamental needs, and our histories. So what can we tell about ourselves from these buildings? What do they say to us? It's a question I've asked myself constantly. I'm Ro Hoskins, and as a director of an architectural practice, understanding the stories held within the walls of our buildings has been a lifelong obsession. In this series, we're going to take you on a journey to explore not just our architectural structures, but also the social and cultural histories from which our buildings arise. We'll ask, what is Māori architecture? And celebrate some of our most stunning buildings. Architecture is the boldest, most public of art forms. Your art is staring the whole world in the face. In the 19th century, Gustav Eiffel made a building where the weight of the air inside the structure weighed more than the structure itself. In Spain, Gaudi dreamed up organic structures without once using a straight line. In the 60s, Minoru Yamasaki sent 2 skyscrapers climbing far into the heavens. Architecture becomes truly thrilling when an architect starts with the familiar and takes it somewhere entirely unfamiliar. Te Ngākau Mahaki Wharenui, designed by Lionel Grant, starts with a very recognisable structure, the Wharenui, and takes it to a bold, unexpected place. Grant, who is one of our greatest living tohunga whakairo, uses an array of media and material, including this collection of dashboard lights from mid-70s Holdens. The house is supported by a central poe created from cast bronze. Alongside Lionel's masterful traditional carvings, he used some very non-traditional techniques, like weaving that's been vacuum sealed around custom board, to produce a sculptural representation of the pantheon of tupuna who look over this house. But Lionel's radical building didn't emerge out of thin air. As part of a larger whakapapa, an architectural history, the tradition of the Wharenui. The classical Wharenui takes a very familiar form. So while every whare is different, in many ways they're all the same. The Wharenui can be seen as an architectural representation of the physical body, often that of an important ancestor. The koruru, the head. The maihi, the arms. The raparapa, the fingers. And the tāhuhu, the backbone. The potoko manua, the heart. And the heke, the ribs. Often referred to as a living ancestor, the Wharenui is one of our most unique architectural structures. But where did the structure come from? The concept of a central chiefly house has been embedded in Māori culture from the beginning. But the Wharenui that we see today has evolved dramatically. In the post-colonial world, the pressures of land loss, alienation, and social upheaval created the need for large buildings to debate, monarchy, and focus identity. It was from these circumstances that the modern Wharenui rose to prominence. Stylistically, they transformed the arts that had embellished other forms, like waka, chiefly houses, and pātaka. The pātaka whakairo was the most impressive of all storehouses and stood within the fortified pā. Elevated from the ground to protect the taonga stored inside, the pātaka was an elaborately decorated structure, and in it one can see the seed of the classical Wharenui. 2 structures that look incredibly familiar and share many traits.
Te Parapara is the only garden of its type in New Zealand. But we've been as authentic as possible to reconstructing those structures. It's the revival of those many lost skills. Nobody's built a full-scale pātaka for well over a century.
At Parapara in Hamilton Gardens, carver Wharenui Puke is working on a pātaka whakairo that will be the centrepiece of a nearly completed Māori garden. The mahi patterns of this magnificent structure are exact replicas of carvings excavated in 1978 by archaeologists in Hamilton.
A pātaka whakairo like this often stored kai that were only used for certain occasions, like for special hui, like the type of kai ranging from taha huahua, the one containing kiri tangata, human flesh, stored on its fat. The good were often stored in the pātaka like this as well. The taongas, the patu, the paulamu, the korowai, the special effects of the ariki or the rangatira of this area were stored in pātaka like this. The pātaka is really the epitome of the wealth of the mana, of the hapu or the rangatira who was able to afford those sorts of things. That often set the basis of bartering, of koha. I would say they elevated off the ground, as you see here, as a means of protecting the food itself from rats. It's probably because its mana is greater than those that surround it.
Whakairo techniques from the stone tool period have also been incorporated back into this pātaka. Wiremu sees a definite link between the structure of the pātaka whakairo and the later development of the Wharenui.
Originally the pātaka was the main essential structure, and then next to that was the chief's house itself. It appeared that Wharenui really grew in size from the time of Pākehā contact. The tradition of pātaka quickly appeared to go into decline. What we have now are Wharenui that are mostly the most elaborately carved structure that we see now on most marae.
Wharenui Puke is working to keep alive the tradition of pātaka whakairo, as well as the ancient techniques used in their construction.
The pātaka here has been lashed entirely, well, the epa as well, with tōrua feathers, albatross feathers, painted with kokowai, the ochre that was seen on these structures. It was often a museum practice to bring carvings into museums and paint entirely red. What you see here is exactly how a structure would have been seen in the 1700s.
From the mid-1700s, the pātaka was the showpiece for the art of whakairo. As the sun set on this golden era of pātaka whakairo, the art of carving would find new expression with the arrival of the great carved Wharenui. Te Hauki Tūranga is the oldest surviving Wharenui in Aotearoa. It was built in the early 1840s at Orakaya Pūpā near Gisborne by Rungo Whakāta carver Raharuhi Rukupo as a memorial to his older brother, a rangatira who had died in battle. As well as its historical significance, this whare stands as the high point of the great carving tradition of Tūranga Nui Ākiwa. Rukupo was known for his very distinctive whakairo style involving deep cuts that gave figures a three-dimensional profile. The Wharenui unusually contains a representational carving of himself. Rota Waipara is one of the kaitiaki of Te Hauki Tūranga.
I think this house, with all its original carvings in it, gives us pride. You know, to be able to go out and recognise carvings in a lot of houses and say, that's a Rukupo style or Tūranga Nui. It's easily identifiable. But I think you'll find that one of the significant things about the carvings used in this house is the timber that it's been carved from. It looks as though Rukupo has taken the natural curves of a tree and used that to present his work.
Like all Wharenui, it's not just the remarkable skills it showcases, nor its breathtaking beauty that gives it such immense value. Te Haukitūranga is significant for what it means to a people and a place, which is why it's so strange that it's here. At Te Papa Museum in the heart of Wellington City. Instead of here at the old Orokaiapu Pā, where Te Haukitūranga once stood. The events of how this sacred Wharenui ended up in our National Museum, far from its home at Orokaiapu, are full of sadness. In 1867, at the height of the land wars, the Crown confiscated Te Haukitūranga, despite much protest from many of the local people, including Rukupo himself. The Wharenui was dismantled by government forces, loaded on a warship and taken to Wellington. A letter written by the Crown representative at the time to his sister makes clear his intentions. So far, my East Coast dealings have not had brilliant success. The only great thing done was the confiscation and carrying off of a beautiful carved house with a military promptitude that will be recorded to my glory. Although it's been nearly 150 years since Te Haukitūranga was here, it has never been forgotten.
Prior to it being taken, this is possibly how Te Haukitūranga looked before it was taken away.
And the
emphasis on forcibly. So this is a draftsman's impression of where it stood, and we're standing approximately on the site where it was. This whenua we're standing on is Orokaiapu, in close proximity to where it actually stood way back at that time. I wanted something that I could look at and say, kei te tika, that's how it possibly could have looked. And yep, the river's there, that's how it was taken down, that's where it was loaded, and it's now in Te Papa Tongarewa. One day it may possibly come home, but that's for our people to decide. But at least we have a drawing that how it could have been.
All the way through my life, I've been hearing stories about Te Haukitūranga. Even as a student or as a child at Manutuke School, we would have visits from local kaumātua, and I always remember Auntie Henny talking about the whare in a way as if it was still standing, you know, and yet it hasn't been here, you know, for over 100 and something odd years. Yet its wairua, I think, or its mauri still has a strong resonance here within the village itself.
The story of the whare taken by force and Rukupo himself are remembered in the Wharenui that remain in Manutuke.
The tiko at the top is Rukupo. We say it's Rukupo. He has a whao or chisel in his hand. Directly underneath him is a po that was named Kiwa because it was carved by Kiwa, Mihaka. And Kiwa also being a tipuna of this area, hence the naming of Gisborne Tūranga Nui a Kiwa. Surprisingly, Te Poho Rukupo is a fully painted house. I think what's really interesting is in the po tāhuhu and the po tuarongo of the whare, the kōwhaiwhai themselves are representative of those tipuna. So you can see the shapes of tipuna as if they were carved. It gives another perspective on whare tipuna, on Wharenui. I don't know another house like this in the country. Mind you, I'm from Manutuke, small area.
Te Mana o Tūranga was built in 1867 in remembrance of Te Haukitūranga and to help cope with the grief of losing the whare. It sits not far from the site where its brother once stood.
When it was taken, this was built by Rukupo as a replacement for Te Hau.
But I hear them say a lot, no, he didn't, you know,
Yeah.
But he was around,
Yeah.
and he was always around, but you know, of course he was much older than I.
Yeah. But Rukupo was more or less in control of them all. Yeah.
Yeah, he'd be around just making sure, hey,
Yeah, he's in charge, yeah.
Yeah, keeping an eye, you know, with his mana and everything else
Yeah.
to go with it, hey.
Despite many petitions from the iwi for its return, Te Haukitūranga has been held by the Crown in Wellington for over 100 years.
I was there when they took all the pieces together, you know, and we shifted it. So the whole of Rongo moved. We went there on buses. It was a big crowd. And I tell you, it was the most moving sight I'd ever seen. We carried the poes through the street, po by po, right down through the streets. And I think it would have been the first time they've ever seen such a thing, ever done in the city. And that was the Hoki Tūtanga. We went back one time and we stayed in the house, in the museum. You know, they had to give us that privilege. And that's what they did say to us that we could do. And whenever we wanted to use the house, the Hoki Tūtanga Rongo Whakaata, we can actually go there and stay there. I was at the hui when they decided that the Ho would stay in Wellington. It was best there to be well looked after and to be seen by the world. That's how we saw it. So, you know, and over the years, you know, we've had all these new things that's come on with the treaty and everything. So the Ho came alive. So a lot of corridors came about and everybody's thinking, well, we want our Ho back, you know, want it back here. You know, and that's ka pai. But, you know, as I'm saying, not quite yet.
Okay, you just sit down here.
Te Hoki Tūranga is a remarkable historical resource for public education. To have a wharenui like this accessible and open to visit by all New Zealand and international visitors is hugely significant.
Human beings. So when you look at the house, you see a head, legs, arms.
I like the details on the carpet.
The details on the carvings, yeah.
Is it obvious about legend?
You know, there are legends told here at this house, but there are also stories, real stories about real people.
In 2001, the Crown formally acknowledged that Te Hoki Tūranga had been taken without consent and that this was a breach of the principles of the Treaty of Waitangi. Now it's up to Rongo Whakaata to decide the future of the wharenui.
I know how difficult it is to preserve a place like this. And preservation is going to be the thing that the Rongo Whakaata are going to have to wrestle with. How are they going to preserve it? How are they going to maintain it? How are they going to keep it like it is now?
But while the wharenui's presence here is an historic resource for the nation, it's also a tragedy for many of the people for whom the structure means the most. The people of Rongo Whakaata.
How te papa can look after it physically in a particular way. It's not held within a way that we would do it. And there are people that would come into the whare, you know, tourists, they would poke parts of the carvings, and I would have aroha for that, you know, and go. In my heart, I think the only ones that can truly look after that whare is us.
Within the chiefly lineage of carved structures of profound historic, cultural and architectural significance, Te Hoki Tūranga stands proudly in its place as the oldest surviving example.
But unfortunately, Te Hoki Tūranga does not stand in the place it was built. Its tūranga waiwai remains empty, waiting for the return of this sacred house.
It's not saying that Te Hoki Tūranga has been sitting there without any Rongo Whakaata holding in any way. It has had that by individuals that have cared for it and loved it. But my understanding of a whare is that a whare is made up by its people, and we're its people.
Te Ngākau Mahaki, the contemporary wharenui at Auckland's Unitec, is the third and most ambitious project from Master Carver Lionel Grant. Adopting philosophies from over 100 years ago, Grant made sure his designs were true to the tribal and political context. The wharenui was conceived and carved in the place it would stand.
The carvers of days of old were the designers, were the structural engineers, because usually oh yes, let's call the carver and get him to put wallpaper in our box. So I was adamant that should I do another whare after Yehinga, that I'd like to have more inclusion in its inception. When I was at the Māori Arts and Crafts with Hone Taiapa, big packets of timber would arrive. We would carve houses and set them according to a plan for a new whare that was going to be built somewhere in Aotearoa. That
to me had a huge impact on how the whare was going to turn out and how it was going to reflect the people of that area. So having all the wood for this house delivered to my shed in Rotorua was never going to be an option.
The intention was to reintroduce structural principles from Wharenui built over 100 years ago, and this was largely achieved despite modern building regulations. This is an impressive achievement given the building's size.
We were literally constructing each 4x2. We weren't going to buy them from placemakers across the counter. So we were actually carving with a chisel our 4x2s to make our structure.
And of course the tahuhu tying it all together.
Yeah, it's basically 4 logs, homey joined together, a la canoe joins, to get a 25-metre span that we wanted.
The carvings in the whare are arranged chronologically, each popo or carved panel telling a different story, starting with the back wall.
I needed to find a device that would connect with those houses, those old houses, those old carvers, but also speak of new things in regard to using things that I actually remember happened and saying, oh yeah, I remember Bastion Point, and I remember one of my friends getting arrested there, and I remember the scenario at the time back in '77, and it's a pivotal thing that happened in Tamaki. So to me, it's as relevant as a carver of old talking about rangitihi or whoever, and immortalising that person in wood.
The pupu tarakihi here, this is what, heha te hau.
It's titahis moimoia. Ngāti Whātua were wrestling with the decision on whether they should invite Europeans in their midst. And at the end of his moimoia, he says that there will be a pou whakairo planted beside the Waitemata. And in September 1840, the European flag was planted. So it's literally the birth of Auckland.
So you had a real rich tapestry of kōrero to draw on, with Tamaki, so many different waka being associated with the place.
So outside you've got our connection to Polynesia, historical and modern, and the kohanga reo movement, and the DNA thing is as modern and as old as man. So to me it was a current way of connecting, and we all have DNA, no matter who we are. I got a Wiseman street map and blew it up and traced all the lines, and it's about being able to strip off suburbia off the land, and the true history is revealed just under the skin of the land.
The central pole of the whare, or Pautoko Manawa, is imbued with all things relating to the treaty.
So it's a montage of a range of treaty imagery.
Yep, all things pertaining to the treaty, and then I quickly realised that the treaty is our history, and our history is the treaty, so no matter what you throw on there, it's about indirectly related to the treaty. But I've essentially used images, I've used signatures, literal signatures from the treaty, right through to some of the protests that happened with the Treaty Waitangi, and they're all relevant, and they're all part of the story. Essentially, the 2 vines growing over this po are the 2 treaty partners. And sometimes they're interwoven and it's lovey-dovey, and other times they can't get off the pole enough apart from each other.
And the tagging popo, perhaps the most contemporary approach of all,
I guess. Well, it's a modern language, and I thought that a tag was an appropriate format to use for that.
Have you had any feedback from taggers?
No, haven't had.
Don't let taggers in.
Well, they ended up tagging over the top of it. I probably have problems with it.
Lionel was appointed to lead the entire project, just like the role of tohunga whakairo from long ago. In his work, he's continuing in the great tradition of past master carvers, but expressing himself as a contemporary designer and artist as well.
Have you got another whare in you?
I have alluded to what the future could possibly be. It could be a virtual whare. Or so you'll have to put the chisel down for that and get the programming going to create that. But it's a real possibility, and you could do some amazing things.
Whatever the future may hold, there is no doubt that the Wharenui has seen a rich evolution. They are tributes to our ancestors and their stories.
Supporting local content so you can see more of New Zealand on air.